Welcome to the Silicon Slopes Conversations. It is the last one before Christmas, and we are here with Kamel Greene, who is the founder of Poly Platform.
Yes, I am.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. It's snowing outside. I love when it starts snowing. I did get caught in a snowstorm about 2 days ago. I was driving from Duchesne City. I don't know if you all have heard of Duchesne at all, but I spoke at a city council meeting, and I wasn't aware of the weather and how quick it changed. And so I caught myself in Ashley National Forest. I don't know if you all know about where Ashley is. And so I'm at about 9,000 feet elevation, and the snow's just dumping at this point. It started off, it was raining. I thought I was in a good predicament. It started snowing. I pulled over. There was a truck driver. He's chaining up, and he comes to my window. He's like, "Hey, how long are you going to stay out here for?" And I was like, "I'm just going to wait it out." And he said, "I don't think you can wait it out. It's going to be about 6-7 feet." And so I decided to put the hazards on, and by the grace of God, I made it out of there. So interesting week for me, I would say.
Yeah, it sounds like you're hustling,
Yeah.
and you have the worst vehicle known to man for the snow.
PT Cruiser. So I put some weight in it so it can have some traction on the ground, but got the job done.
Yeah, you're here, you're not dead. Pretty good.
Yeah.
All right, we'll get to why you were in Duchesne in a second. We'll tie it all in together. Quick founding story of Poly Platform.
Oh man, it's interesting. I always say I can distinctly remember there was a time period when I was passing out flyers from person to person, and it was back when I was younger. My mother was running for a city council position in East Palo Alto, California. And I remember she ingrained into me the importance of civic engagement, communication, and things like that. And so at an early age, I had a passion for government, had a passion for technology, especially growing up in the Silicon Valley. And so I ended up going to a high school in the area in Mountain View, California, right down the street from Google. Played football. My dad helped out in the community, and so had a passion for athletics as well. But again, it was unique seeing technology and being that close to it, being able to visit Google, being able to visit Intel. And so, I was a part of the debate team, a part of so many different things, but I had this itch when it came to technology, but I had an itch when it came to government as well. And so I wanted to find a way to combine the two. And so I kept on, evaluating that. And so as I, played a little bit of football for Washington State and transferred to BYU, I still kept on that. And so I studied political science. I still did debate at BYU when I was there. And when I graduated in political science, I had this itch still for startups. And so I ended up actually working for Seek, which is an AR platform here in Lehigh. I worked for New Skin. I worked for Weave at the time when they were smaller, and that's when I kind of got hooked, and I wanted to go back to school, and so I decided to get my MPA, which is a little different from the MBA. This is public administration, and so the way I looked at it is, if you want to be tactful, if you want to kind of be an MMA fighter, you'll rather want. I personally would rather want to have some type of differentiation, so not just swinging a punch, jiu-jitsu or something like that. And so that was kind of my logic behind MPA. And so I emphasized in federal and local government, and that's when I really got an opportunity to work for Eagle Mountain City. And I started to see the antiquated technology in the governmental realm. And then I also seen how a lot of people were afraid of the public sector. And so that's kind of what got me into the space. And that's when I decided to build a solution to combat a lot of these civic engagement problems. So that's the short story for it.
Okay. And you were also an intern here at the time.
It was. Yeah.
So a lot of us here saw the transformation and some many pivots of Poly, but what does the platform do?
Yeah.
What's the business model, and how has it been built?
Oh man, I missed some things. Not only bounced around a lot. I think the biggest thing that helped me really start to lean into the startup world and learn so much was my time here at Silicon Slopes, and that was during the same time when I was at Eagle Mountain City. And that's, you go into the build story. Essentially, I was able to lean onto a lot of different things. I feel like sometimes when you're building something or building some type of software, a lot of times people think that it's very difficult and you have to spend tons of money. But I think the biggest thing that people miss out on is local universities. At this time period, we have a younger generation that are using this technology when they're in high school. And a lot of this technology has changed already. And so you have some senior developers who are learning new languages as well. And so what I was able to do is lean onto, Brigham Young University. I went to University of Utah and found some developers. And so back in 2018 is when I was able to have 3 full stack developers. And that's when we really started to build the product. And initially we actually worked with universities. And so we consolidated all the activities and events onto one mobile app. And our goal was to sell to universities. But as I started to really see the problems in the municipal areas, when I started to shift to that. To municipalities. And so what the product is what we do is we make the job easier for city administrators, and we provide a one-stop shop for residents. And so if you're a resident for Lehigh City, for multiple different cities, what you'll do is you'll be able to pay your utilities online, respond to polls, respond to surveys, receive push notifications. And so it's a whole heap of tools, so you don't have to go to Facebook to know what's going on, and then go to a survey tool to respond to a survey. It's all in one spot. And so if you're an administrator, what most cities do is they're paying for multiple different products. They're paying for SurveyMonkey. They're paying for Qualtrics. They're paying for a text messaging app. They're paying for an emergency app. They're paying for constant contact for newsletters. They're paying for a whole heap of tools. And what we've done is we consolidated all onto one platform. So now their job is easier. And we're saying you have your own echo chamber now. You don't have to fight through the constant noise. And then you don't have to get the skewed information because it's just Johnny saying he doesn't want high density or he doesn't want this, and he's skewing it. Now you're getting analytics to make better decisions. And that, in the short, is essentially what Poly Platform is.
Yeah. And so from the user's perspective, hey, there's a pothole,
Yep.
or there's a flood.
Yeah.
And from the administrator's perspective, what do you guys think about high density housing, or there's a snow advisory, or don't plan on the road? So it's, right. For anyone that's ever tried to work with government, it's a little bit tricky, whether it's paper forms or just a Byzantine bureaucracy.
Right.
And that's why people mock it and poo-poo it, and a lot of the times don't even have the time or bandwidth to pursue it.
Right. Right. Which helps out for me because it's a competitive. It's a seemingly competitive space, but it's not too competitive. There's a lot of people that are afraid of it just because of the quote unquote red tape, and that's what opened the door for me.
Yeah. So we can use various examples, right? Mm-hmm. Lehigh.
Yep. Lehigh, West Point, Blanding City, some cities out in Washington State. And then also, we work with companies as well. And so we have some good amount of companies on board too.
Let's just use Blanding as an example, right? Because it's kind of on its own.
Yeah.
Lehigh is connected to a bunch of other cities. Right. But the folks at Blanding City want to communicate with their constituents,
yep.
hear from their constituents, and they don't want to do it on 8 or 9 different platforms.
Right.
Want it to be consolidated.
Yeah.
And so that's what you're solving for, correct?
We're solving for consolidation, but at the same time, it's at a fraction of the cost. Because if you look at it, if a smaller city like Blanding City, they'll have to pay for a SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, with just that tool in itself costs more than Poly Platform. But then what Poly does is it solves the problem for additional 3 tools that they'll have to purchase. And so it's a consolidation, so now they can reallocate a lot of their resources. And then at the same time, it's saving them tons of money. But then it's increasing their civic engagement as well, because now the residents don't have to constantly call them and say there's a dead deer in the road. They can report that issue, or they can respond to different things. So multiple different problems it's solving, but it's still at a fraction of the cost. And so it's a good sell and an easy sell in that regard.
Yeah. Okay. So just like every other entrepreneur,
yeah.
you're solving for a problem that from an early age you kind of saw, but
yep.
then when you worked at Eagle Mountain, and then
yeah.
what you learned at school,
yeah.
and all of that. So you prefaced it a little bit, and I always just call it duct tape and baling wire, right?
Yeah.
But I know, because we chat several times a month, that you were working full-time.
Yep.
And then doing this with duct tape and baling wire.
Right.
So you'd have to shift gears a lot.
Yeah.
9 to 5, hop on, do a demo for a city,
yep.
follow up, like all the really annoying stuff, right?
Yeah.
Sales funnels, all of that
Yeah.
stuff. So what was because there was a few pivots, right?
Yeah.
What ultimately drove you as the founder and CEO to decide when to do pivots, both from a positive point of view, right? Like that looks like an addressable market, or a negative one where like this isn't working, let's just pivot. What's the thought through?
Well, I think
brain?
that's a good question. The biggest thing is being able to know where you are and be real with yourself. I think a lot of times I talk to multiple different people, and sometimes you feel like your stuff doesn't smell. And so I was able to be more honest with myself, and so listening to customers and seeing, are we actually addressing an issue? Conducting primary research, looking at the secondary research. And so initially we started working with universities. But people talk about bureaucracy. Universities try to sell to universities, and then you'll be able to see some bureaucracy. And so that was one of the first pivot, is we were looking at what were the resources we were spending to try to contact the point of contact, the decision maker. And so that's when we really said we need to pivot to a better and easier space. And that's where we were able to see our lower hanging fruit, which were universities. As far as your second question, that was kind of, when did we, adjust like product and things like that. The biggest thing for that was moreover just listening. I think, we were listening to a lot of different people. We were listening to what our current customers were saying. And then we really just, did some research and really started to evaluate, okay, this is the problem. But it was through a lot of testing and research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so selfishly, the reason why I wanted you to be a guest.
Yeah.
You're probably one of the earliest stage companies that we've ever had in the kind of the weekly conversation.
Yeah.
But one is I was able to see it from inception to now. But the challenges you were going through are faced by a lot of other entrepreneurs. So that's why I wanted you here today. So fundraising, you've learned a lot over the last 3 or 4 years.
Right.
So you show up with just a rubbish pitch deck and get laughed out of the room versus some of your more successful ones. So this is actual tips and best practices for folks like you 3 years ago. Like, if you knew what you know now, give some advice on that.
What I would say is, we know about a lot. They talk about the ethos, pathos, and logos. I think the biggest thing is knowing your audience. A lot of times when you're the one presenting your stuff, you kind of fall in this third person effect where, or this groupthink effect is more of what I would say, where you know a lot of the answers. And so when you're explaining it, you're not explaining the details. You're just saying, yeah, it's an enterprise solution. We sell to cities. But not a lot of people understand what the back end of city administration looks like. And a lot of times civic engagement is already kind of poor, so even the resident doesn't necessarily know what that looked like. And so the biggest thing for me was being able to understand or put myself in the shoes of the audience and not explain the product or explain what I'm doing from Kamel's point of view, but explain it as if I'm saying it to someone who doesn't necessarily understand it. And so that was the first thing. It's something that you think is obvious. It's really just knowing who your audience is. I think the second thing is really being able to have a clear, concise goal. Do I want to bootstrap? Do I want to sell? Is this something that I want to IPO? Is this something that I want to get acquired? Because once you're able to answer those questions, then you'll be able to set the terms and know what terms that you want to agree to. So that was the biggest thing, is being able to evaluate what are your end goals so you can understand what your early on parameters are going to be.
Yeah. And let's go over, from my knowledge, and you can add to it, the various ways that you've pitched poly-platform. So there's been times where we've been in the same room at an event or even just here in the office, and there will be a person that I know has a little bit of folding money. I'll say, go talk to them. Right? That's very simple. I won't even go introduce. You're on your own, go do it. Angels, right? Salt Lake City. Park City. And then a lot of funds, right? And all of these are very different. One is you're actually just at a cocktail party. You got to get the pitch out. One is very formal with funds, and then the other one's also formal and nerve-wracking, which is angels. So how have you tackled that? And again, give some advice on how to handle the different ones.
It's interesting. You're right. Sometimes you watch Shark Tank and you think that everything is like Shark Tank, but it's not. And so I didn't think that the angel, and like when you're pitching to angels, that one was going to be more cutthroat, but it is. And so really the biggest thing, again, is going over it, the simple stuff, practicing it. But I think the biggest thing is having good mentors. And once you can have good mentors, once you can have good advisors, that's when you're able to really have a good guidance on how to go about doing certain things. So, I mean, that would be the first thing, is being able to lean on people who's done it before. The second thing is when you go in there, I think it's just being calm and know your product, know the questions that they're going to ask. One of the biggest things is you get a lot of the same questions all the time. That's one thing that I would say. And so if you can understand your product, if you trust your product and you trust what you're going to say, then I think you'll be fine. And so I'll just say be calm, be confident, and be transparent. Don't lie about certain things. I think you'll be fine. That was the biggest thing for me.
So how many ballpark times have you pitched or promoted Poly-Platform over the last just year?
Yeah, over the last year, I've probably pitched it about 80 times, formally. Informally, I can't count, but as far as formal pitches, around 80, 60, yeah.
Yeah, and that probably falls in line with a lot of startups over the course of human history, right? Like, there are some where it's no-brainer and they kind of have an easier path, but that's persistence, right?
Right.
And so let's talk about having a high pain threshold, which I think you do have.
Yeah.
Again, working a job and then this, basically 90, 100 hours a week, right? If you're going to do it right. Stressful, because you're missing out on something, but you got to stay and do that job well. Again, advice for breaking through the wall and then seeing another wall right after it.
Well, there you go. You said seeing another wall right after, because I'm still in the process of breaking through a wall now. I think the biggest thing is, to me, I don't subscribe to being a nonconformist, but I think it's good to have a loose screw to a certain extent. I remember playing football, and the linebackers were always known as the guys that had the loose screw, and I think it's a good thing to a certain extent. I think it's always good to listen, but you need to stand on what you believe. And I think what happens a lot of times is early on, especially early entrepreneurs, they talk to one person, that one person says, well, no, that's not going to work because the market is X, Y, and Z, or no, this is not going to work because of this. And that's why you see a lot of startups fold early. And so I think the biggest thing for me is being able to balance the ideas of listening to others, but also drawing that line in the sand and standing on it. And when you can do that, then you can keep persevering through these walls and keep going. So that's what I would say is listen to others, but to a certain extent, have your values and stand on that.
Right. And then you've also, it's lonely because you're going to have to make decisions on your own at some point. You mentioned bootstrapping or raising money. That's just one sequence of decisions. But you've also mentioned the importance of mentors and advisors. How have you built out your kind of advisory committee and mentor network?
Well, I think that's been the unique thing. From the advisory standpoint, one thing I built it out from people who served in the mentorship capacity, but they strategically helped me in areas that I was a little ignorant to. And so, for example, when I was early on in the governmental realm, I was still learning about it. I grew up around it, but I still wanted that hands-on, procurement process, RFP process, council process, those type of things. And so I was able to get an advisory member who worked in that area for 30 plus years, right? When it comes to sales, find someone who's knowledgeable in that area. When it comes to multiple different areas, even areas in which I think I know, I strategically and tactfully found someone in that area to help from an advisory standpoint, that if they're not bringing, resources from a social network standpoint, they're bringing resources from a human capital standpoint. And so that was the advisory process. As far as mentorship process, I think that one is the fun one. That one is, George, for example, right? It's just, you end up meeting certain people who are knowledgeable, but, you actually have a connection, friendship, things like that, where I can call and say, hey, what do you think about this? Can you help me out with this? I'm having trouble with this. And so I think mentorship is the one where don't be afraid to ask. That was always the thing for me is, I've shot George probably 2 emails now, and then he responded and said, hey, let's go out for lunch, let's do this, right? And so the biggest thing is you closed mouths don't get fed. And so in this, it is lonely. And so if you don't ask the question, if you don't ask for it, then it probably won't happen. And so that would be the advice for me is don't be scared what other people think. Just ask.
Yeah. And then another thing that I've noticed that you've done a good job in is you've got some that you can go to coffee and lunch. That's, call it a half an hour to 60 minutes.
Yep.
You've got some that might be fleeting and it's only 5 to 10 minutes. And so what I've kind of iterated to you over the years is like you got to be fast and quick with those ones, right? Because there might not be a follow-on, but they might give you 2 or 3 tidbits of information.
Yeah.
And you don't lack in the courage, right? You're willing to talk to anyone.
Yeah.
But for those drive-bys, again, you're kind of driving by someone that might have done it 4 or 5 times, and their 4 minutes might be more valuable than an entire 60 minutes with somebody else. What are some of the key questions you ask in those quick drive-bys?
Yeah, for me, I don't know. I try to focus more genuinely. I think the biggest thing is a lot of times I don't come necessarily with an agenda. Obviously, we all have an agenda to a certain extent, but I think the biggest thing is understanding the person first. I try to get that second conversation, even if it's seemingly difficult to get that second conversation. So for me, what's always been off-putting for me is sometimes when I'll get a question, I get straight to the point, for me personally. And some people like that. And so my first questions are really, tell me about yourself. How did you get to that? I think that people enjoy talking more about themselves. Like we hear that a lot, but I find value in it. There's always something that someone's been through that I can lean on and learn from. And so to answer your question, it wouldn't actually be much to entrepreneurship or how you got here is, can you tell me more about yourself? And I think when you can do that, that's when you can really start to lean on those genuine and create genuine relationships. And so that's something that a lot of people probably won't do, but that's what I do in those pass-bys is make it more about them. And I think that's how you're able to have those second conversations.
Yeah. A lot of startups fail for a lot of various reasons, but one of them is product market fit, right?
Right.
And I reckon you have a pretty good product market fit now.
Yeah.
Took a few years and iterations, but overall, like pretty fast on the timeline.
Yeah.
And now you're focused completely on poly-platform now, which was always my only piece of advice, like cut bait, go all in.
Yeah.
You have paying customers, so now you're at a point where it needs to go like this, right?
Yep.
Not like that.
Yep.
What are the plans to do that?
The biggest thing, we're in a unique situation where we have a full development team. We have, 2 full stack developers, 2 front end, 1 back end. And so from the technological side of things, we're in a good position. And if you juxtapose that to most startups that are in our like kind of where we are, the biggest thing is they're asking for capital so that they can build out the tool, build out the product. Our biggest thing is we simply need that because we're constrained by our resources. There's only 3 sales guys. We need more if we want to scale, go to Washington State, go to California, et cetera. And so the biggest thing is raising capital. And that goes back to the earlier question where knowing what you want to do. If we want to bootstrap, we'll be fine bootstrapping, but I know I want to get to a certain point. And so if I want to get to that certain point, I need the necessary capital so that I can scale from a marketing and sales standpoint. And so that's the plan, to answer your question, is we really need to focus on raising and tactfully going after these certain states that align with the criteria that we've seen from the product market fit research.
Yeah. And there's, cities in America that have 8 million people and some that have 80, right? As far as again, the best product market fit that you've found, what do those cities and municipalities look like?
Yeah, it's more medium sized. And what I mean by that is Utah has about 3.6 million people. California has around 38 million. And so in all reality, most cities in the state of Utah don't fall in the large city. You have Salt Lake City, which is the highest populated city, and they're just over 100,000. That's still technically median. And so when you look at our competitors, most of the cities, when I go to a lot of conferences all the time, a lot of smaller cities can't afford these big, robust tools. And so I have a sweet spot in the market where there's little to no competitors. And so when they see a product that can do a lot of those things, they already don't have too many resources. They have the deputy clerk that's serving as a social media and public information officer. We found a sweet spot in that area. And so a lot of the areas that we go is more smaller cities because there's more small cities in America than there are larger cities. And that's one of the good things for us.
Yep.
Yeah.
But culturally different, right?
culturally different. And that's one of the biggest things too. I think what we were seeing early on, slightly before COVID, you like to be raw and have genuine conversations. One of the biggest things that we've seen is kind of, technology was more of like a progressive thing, right? And so from an ideological side, sometimes you were able to see where there were, and this is kind of when we were trying to find that product market fit, technology was associated with, more this side of the room, right? And so there's a little hesitation with that. But I think that was one of the positive externalities that came out of COVID-19, was that COVID-19 forced everyone from a technological standpoint to have to communicate digitally. And so a lot of entities, a lot of startups, a lot of companies were hurt with COVID-19. It only helped us because we are an engagement tool, and so we literally facilitate digital communication. And everyone had to communicate like that, and so that helped us. And so you talk about kind of ideology and things like that. We're in a good position now, but I think one of the biggest things is when we look at our criteria, we evaluate, okay, this helped in Utah, and Utah's an outlier, is what I would say as well. But we were able to see, okay, we created personas for certain states and operated off of that. But COVID actually has helped that because, take my dad, for example, who had no idea what Zoom was. Now he operates on that all the time. And so that helped us because every city knows that this is something that they need.
Yeah. All right, I have one more question, then we'll open it up from the audience. Give us, so you can drive the point home strongly one more time, a quick use case study. You don't have to name the municipality or the client, but how they have used the tool successfully.
Yeah. The biggest thing, I was just, speaking at an event yesterday. When you look at, from a logical flow and you try to address the problem, A plus B equals C, I think a lot of times people are addressing B opposed to addressing A. And what I mean by that is that the current solutions that most entities are using across the board to communicate with their constituents is social media. But if you look at the reality of social media, if you look at the reality of email, you're yelling in an empty room. And you're trying to fight this evolution of technology. And so what we've created is we've created an echo chamber so that you can thoroughly communicate with your constituents. That's the biggest thing. And so if I'm a city, I now have my own echo chamber. I don't have to fight through the noise. I can get my information out. And if I'm a resident, I have a one-stop shop to do everything within my city. And so it solves a lot of problems across the board.
Yeah. I live in Holiday City as an example, and they actually do a lot of really cool programming.
Right.
And if I don't drive by the little town square and see a sign about the Christmas tree lighting, that's just one example, but they do awesome stuff throughout the year, and it's fun and family-oriented and folksy.
Yeah.
Because, as you know, I don't use my phone for anything other than talking or texting.
Yeah.
Not an app guy,
Exactly.
but there's been all sorts of events where I'm like, dang it, that would have been really fun.
You don't know what you don't know, and that's the biggest thing. And a lot of if you look at the very premise of municipalities, is so that they can communicate, so they can be representative of the constituents. But if they're not getting the word out, and if the residents aren't knowing what's going on, then that's a clear discrepancy. And so what we're doing is we're trying to solve that.
Yeah, and I mean, just in this example, everyone mocks government. They're not cool or innovative, but they have like really fun events and really cool programming, great content that's way better than Netflix. And you should know about it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things, so we do surveys and we have a full analytics team. So what we do is we also analyze the surveys and run those regressional analysis and things. One of the biggest data points that we seen was there was a question from a city, and they asked a question. They said, how many council meetings have you went to? On average, 90% of the people said they went to maybe one council meeting a year. However, there was a following question that said, if you were to, take the survey again, a Likert scale, or Likert scale, however you want to pronounce it, 90% of people said, we want to be civically engaged, we want to take these surveys, et cetera. And so seemingly before, if you don't look at the data, a lot of the council members and administration will say a lot of people don't necessarily care. But that's the thing, is that the world is changing, technology is changing, and so perception doesn't necessarily mean the reality of things. And so just because you don't see people at city council meeting does not equate to, you hear the same thing a lot of times, correlation does not equate to causation. And so if you look at it, just because people aren't there, that doesn't mean that they don't want to be civically engaged. And so we were able to see a strong data point that showed that people do want to be informed, they do want to be civically engaged, and just because they're not physically in the seats does not mean that they don't want to be it. And so that was one of the biggest thing the biggest takeaway that city had, and they're starting to operate off that now.
Yeah, very cool. Questions?
Heck yeah.
You mentioned funding.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great information. How's it been going?
It's been going pretty well. The biggest thing, Garrett touched on it a lot as well, is that, I was working in the federal space for a period. And so that was my full-time job. And so I had to focus on that. And so now that we're focused 100% on Poly Platform, it's opened up a lot of doors from the funding status. And so we're in diligence with a few funds, and we're working with a few angel investors. And so hopefully, around the next 3-4 months, we'll be able to close in on our first round.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm curious, going back to the beginning of PolyPro.
Yeah.
So you created this product. You were, for colleges. I'm just curious, like, when you guys, from the point that you had the idea to create this communication platform to when you actually created it, did you try to find a way to solve it manually before you started to create it? Did you dive headfirst into it once you had the idea from inception? I'm just a little more curious.
No, I think that's a good question. It goes back into, like, you've probably read the book Lean Startup Method and all those type of things, right? A lot of times, I think that people fall into this data paralysis, right? In the sense of where they're researching so much, but it's prohibiting them to move. And so what I did was, there's a lot of entities, Harvard, Stanford, et cetera, that was able to do a lot of secondary research that I can lean on. And so for me, it was leaning on to a lot of secondary research. I did conduct some of my primary research, and I did that manually, right? We were able to do quantitative and qualitative, do focus groups, and do surveys and things like that. But while doing that, I think the biggest focus was to move and lean onto secondary research. And so I didn't spend too much time on that, but because of the process of being in school and graduate school at the time, you were forced to have to go through those things. And so I did do a lot of it manually too. But the biggest thing for me was trying to build something. I think the ultimate research that you can get is primary research. And so right when I identified a problem, and it was from secondary research, I decided to build it because the best research I can get is when people are actually using it. So hopefully I answered your question, is that, from the university side of things, the biggest thing that we're solving is there's a void. A lot of, similar to Poly Platform, a lot of students are going to school and they're not knowing what's out there, and there's tons of events going on. And so that was something that we were able to solve instantly from primary research, but there's a lot of secondary research to back it up. But I think the biggest test was building a product and then testing it out and seeing if that's also solving a thing. So that's what we did.
Oh, that's cool. Did your product change pretty dramatically from when you made the pivot from going after universities to the municipalities, or did it not change very much?
It did, to be honest, it didn't change much because, we want to focus on, Simon Sinek, the why, right? The why was information. We want to make information there. And so that is still the core to it. It did change in kind of the bells and whistles, the ability to report an issue and things, and, integrate with, express bill paying, you could pay utilities online. But as far as the core, administrators being able to create events and serving as a one-stop shop, that didn't change much, to be honest.
Cool. Awesome.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh, over there on the couch.
Oh, yes, sir.
Hey, Kamel, good to see you again. Can you talk to us a little bit about building your team? As the CEO, your role is to gather good people around you to help you build this company. Talk to us a little bit about that and what kind of a culture that you've built within your company.
Yeah, that's a good question. The biggest thing first was, you have to be intentional with what you want, but you have to be okay with what you get when you don't have necessarily the value to bring. And so when you're starting off, I can't pay you, right? And then, the next thing is sweat equity and all those type of things. And so I was intentional with what we needed, right? And so I knew the value add that I had, and knew the value add that the co-founder had, but I knew what we needed. And so the biggest thing was finding people who can get those jobs done in that certain capacity, but knowing that what I get is not necessarily going to be 100%. And so I can't necessarily say, hey, what are you doing? We were supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And so the culture that I brought, because I had opportunities to work for free for multiple different startups, was, hey, I know that you're not going to be a master, you're not going to be a subject matter expert in this, but we want you to learn so that you can help us. And so the culture was more on, kind of learn through application and get better from that. And so that was the culture, is that you come in, you don't have to know everything, but you're going to be a hard worker, you're going to be scrappy, and you're going to be innovative.
One more right here.
So, like, considering you're like at the beginning stages of your company and everything, and obviously it's not going to be a smooth road at all. But
Right.
what was like one of your largest bumps in the road, and what was like your drive to keep going till this day, per se?
Oh, that's a good question. My largest bump in the road was one. This is about 3 years ago. Coming to that realization is that like if I don't wake up tomorrow and try to do this, then nothing is going to happen. And so it was a time period. It was actually before COVID. I think we actually had an event where we put something on for college students and things like that. And things were going fast, but then our co-founder at the time, there was a lot of changes going on in his life, and he had to take a step away. And so it was just me doing it 100% by myself. And it was really just kind of sitting there and saying, man, like I dictate the next moves on this. And how I was able to respond was just, it was something I was passionate about, and I just kept going. As cliched as it is, I think the quick answer is to keep moving forward, just literally one day at a time. We're gonna do this and accomplishing that, and then once you do that, you kind of gain your confidence and keep moving from there. Hopefully I answered your question.
You did.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Have you got your Christmas shopping done?
I've not got my Christmas shopping done.
Might I recommend, this is a really nice hoodie. I just got it yesterday.
Okay.
Koala Tree. I'm just sitting here ensconced in.
Awesome. So Qualtree
Warmness.
just got a nice shout out. So there you go.
Well, yeah, I usually don't do it, but this thing's amazing. I'd recommend it. Thank you so much for being the last guest
Yeah.
of 2021.
Awesome. Thank you all for showing up, and thank you for the opportunity, Silicon Slopes.
Cool. Kamel Greene, Poly Platform. Thank you.
Peace out.